Ladies and gentlemen, today's side proposition came up here and painted a picture of nuclear energy as something that is very far away from us, a concept that is very distant from our lives. But today's side opposition is here to tell you that nuclear energy is closer to our lives than we think. Now, what do you think the reason Korea's gasoline prices are high, but what do you think the reason is for Korea's gasoline prices being high, but the price of electricity being the lowest in the world? We say that that's because we have nuclear energy to support our electricity. Now, side proposition today is coming forward, and they claim that they will get rid of an energy source that accounts for more than 80% of Korea's electricity. Now, side opposition says that it is very irresponsible for side proposition to come forward with this, with the idea of banning nuclear energy completely. Now, as a deputy leader of opposition, I'll be elaborating on our side's third substantive argument about dependency, how we're actually relying on other countries for energy sources, and how developing nuclear energy can be independent for our country. But before moving on to our own substantive case, let's look at what happened in the debate so far. Now, the side proposition had mainly 5 contentions to side opposition. Now, the first point was about how, although we have nuclear energy, there will still be fights and there will still be a country that dominates the resources. Side proposition was very concerned with the price of resources for nuclear energy being very high. But today, side opposition asks you to look at this on a relative level, because we see that compared to petroleum, we see that uranium, the development of nuclear energy is very cost efficient. We only have to so once we build the infrastructure, and once we have the minimum amount of uranium needed for the development of nuclear energy, we say it's much more cost efficient. And side proposition, if they want to support petroleum and if they want to ban nuclear energy completely, they have to tell us why, although there is a characteristic of cost efficiency, they want to ban that. The second point of contention that they had was about radioactive waste. They talked about how nuclear energy has harms on our environment. Now, we have 2 points of refutation to this. First, we say that nuclear energy is not actually the only energy source that has such impact on the environment. We say that it's not just radioactive waste that they should be concerned about, but if they're so concerned about energy sources harming our environment, why not petroleum and the result of fossil fuels being burned that leave irrevocable harms, no thank you sir, to our environment? We say side proposition has been very irresponsible with that. Our second point of refutation is that although side proposition has painted a picture of nuclear energy being not eco-friendly, we showed you how nuclear energy has less carbon emissions than petroleum, than the energy resources that side proposition so supports today. So we say that our point about nuclear energy being eco-friendly actually still stands. No, thank you, sir. Now, the third point of contention was about the geopolitical tension that side proposition was worried about today. Now, they talked about how nuclear bombs are because nuclear energy can develop into nuclear weapons, how we should get rid of that factor completely. Well, we say that side proposition seems to think every source of weaponry as very dangerous, because we see that we are receiving benefits from nuclear energy, and although there might be a risk that nuclear energy may develop into nuclear weapons, that exists for many other things as well. And we say that the benefits that we get from using nuclear energy far more outweighs the risk that side proposition posed today. Now, the fourth contention was about technological developments. What side opposition was telling me today was that the mistakes that we made regarding Chernobyl and Japan was there are mistakes that were made in the process of technological development. We showed you how we learn from our mistakes. We showed you how we are making that development right now and how we're coming up with safer measures. Now, side proposition said that we are only trying to justify the accidents that happened. Well, the fact of the matter is, side proposition seems to think that nuclear energy is actually the only source, that is actually the only type of development that has accidents in the process. We ask you to look at the example of oil refineries exploding, and also oil spills that happen with petroleum. No, thank you, sir. Those are also accidents that happen and that also have detrimental effects on our environment as well. We asked side proposition to deal with that because we see that nuclear energy is developing and we are coming up with safer measures. No, thank you, sir. So the fifth contention was about their substantive argument, about how we are not using enough money to fund other technology being developed. Now, side proposition didn't really seem to realize that today we are actually very, very dependent on nuclear energy for the sources of nuclear energy for our energy sources. Because side proposition said that if we simply stop using the money on nuclear energy and if we start using that money for other energy sources, it'll be more efficient. But the fact of the matter is, in the case of Korea, more than 80% of the sources of electricity are actually dependent on nuclear energy. Also, in the example of France, 70% of their energy is actually developed through nuclear energy. So we say that although they talk of alternative resources, their investment in alternative resources and cutting off investment in nuclear energy can actually cause harms that will take away the sustainability of energy sources that many countries have. So having refuted to their points, let me move on to our side's third substantive argument about independent energy. Now we ask you to look at countries that don't have natural resources to support them, like Korea. Now they depend on countries that have natural resources to export at an adequate price. We see examples of organizations such as OPEC that decide to impose an oil cartel and have a huge detrimental effect on countries that don't have resources. We say that for countries that don't have these resources, they will be helped if they can develop nuclear energy for themselves. We say that's a method in which these countries can develop independently. No, thank you, sir. And we ask you to look at the example of Korea, in which 80% of electricity is actually dependent on nuclear energy, and also in the example of France, who actually depends 70%, Sweden 50%. We see examples of countries that have developed nuclear energy to a point where they're relying on that as a source of their energy as well. We say that if side proposition comes forward and takes these energy sources away from them, then these countries will actually become more reliant on other countries and will become more dependent. So we say that for side proposition to take away nuclear energy from the countries that are actually relying on them, we say that's very irresponsible and that it's actually taking away the sustainability of energy resources for these countries. So ladies and gentlemen, because side proposition painted a picture of nuclear energy that is actually supporting their electricity, that is actually generating their energy, we say on side opposition that we cannot let side proposition take away the energy sources that are so close to our lives. We beg to oppose. Thank you.